Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're finally going to be finishing part 2 of the Artificer spell list. I did part 1 a while ago and then I just completely forgot about it. So for both of the people looking forward to seeing the Alchemist spell list completed, today is your lucky day. I'm also going to say that my next video is just going to be kind of a fun, ridiculous multi-class video. I've challenged a bunch of my friends to each come up with how would they build a level 20 character that has to combine all 4 of the charisma classes: Bard, Paladin, Sorcerer, and Warlock. You have to have at least 1 level of each, and how would you build that character? And I think it'll be kind of fun because it'll have a bunch of different build ideas, hopefully. Hopefully we don't all just make the exact same thing, except one guy went like Oath of the Ancients, and another guy went Oath of Vengeance, and another one went Oath of Conquest or something. That'd be terrible. But hopefully we'll have a bunch of different perspectives on how to do it, and I just think that'll be fun. And I'm not saying these are going to be like the most optimized, ideal characters ever. Anytime you're combining 4 classes, things get a little crazy and ridiculous, but I just think it'll be fun and it'll give us some interesting ideas. Because personally, I tend to think along like certain lines a lot of times. So having other perspectives is really, really nice. So I think that'll be a fun video. Anyways, on to today's video, which of course is what we're all here for, and that is the Artificer spell list. So we're going to be going through all the 4 subclasses because we already covered the main list, and I'll just be giving my thoughts on each one of them. So for Alchemist, we have Healing Word and Ray of Sickness, both at level 3. I love Healing Word. It is one of the best healing spells in the game, in my opinion, for its level especially. The fact that it's only a bonus action, it's ranged, it's really, really nice. It allows you to bring back one of your fallen allies and bring them back up into the battle, as long as they're not dead, of course. And it's just a great spell in general. Ray of Sickness, the damage is alright, and the condition modifier is quite good. I like that. My only problems with it is that it is poison damage, which is the most commonly resisted or immune damage type in the game, and it's also a Constitution saving throw, which generally is one of the monster's best saving throws. So I don't think it's a terrible spell by any means, but there are probably more reliable ways to do things. But it's not a bad spell by any means, and having it on my spell list is better than not having it, so whatever. Level 5, Flaming Sphere and Melt's Acid Arrow. I'm not the biggest fan of Melt's Acid Arrow. In fact, I'm not the biggest fan of direct damage spells in general, but I do like things like Flaming Sphere, where they stay in play and I can maybe do that damage subsequent times, right? Any chance I have to do damage multiple rounds after a row, then I find the spell starts getting a lot more value out of it. And that's not all damage spells. Obviously things like Fireball are still really good, right? I'm not trying to complain about all damage spells. But if you've watched a lot of my videos, you know that I generally find the damage spell scale like this, and monster hit point scale like this. And so the higher level you get, the less value these things have. And that's even more true when you're a half caster, or a third caster like an Elder's Knight, right? So getting Fireball at level 5 on a wizard is great. Getting Fireball at level 13 on your Elder's Knight is, not so great. By then, Fireball's not really killing much of anything. It still has its uses if you want to clear out some trash or whatever, but you know what I'm saying. But hopefully that's a decent example for what I'm talking about, where the monster hit points just continue to scale way faster than the damage on your spells. But if you can do that damage multiple times in a row, multiple rounds, it starts getting a lot more value. Level 9, you get Gaseous Form and Mass Healing Word. Gaseous Form can be useful sometimes for like scouting and stuff. I don't think it's a bad spell. It does tend to lead to a lot of split the party mechanics, I've noticed though, where one person goes gaseous and then they go to check something out, and that can be bad. Or you just take the whole party with you, which could be okay. There are moments where I think the spell is actually really good in the exploration pillar, but I do find that tends to be rather circumstantial. But it's not a bad spell by any means, and having it on my spell list is great. Mass Healing Word. Not as good as Healing Word in my opinion, but that's mostly just because it's less practical. It's still a great, great healing spell. But I find that in order to use Mass Healing Word effectively, I want a bunch of allies that are all low on health simultaneously, or 2 people or 3 people that all got knocked unconscious in the same round, and then I can bring them all up at once. That's not usually how things happen, but it does happen sometimes, which is why this is still a great spell. But if I compare it to Healing Word, it's very common that, say, your fighter or paladin or whoever just gets a couple unlucky crits against them in the same round of combat and goes down, you know? And they're kind of getting beaten down, but they're okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm kind of losing some health here, but I think I'm fine. And all of a sudden, crit, and, you know, they're making death saving throws. So Healing Word in those circumstances is, you know, awesome. Mass Healing Word kind of requires that to happen to a bunch of people, and that's not usually how things happen. But you never know. There's like breath weapons and fireball spells and whatnot that could all drop multiple people at once. So I'm not saying it's a bad spell by any means. It's actually a really, really good spell. It's just not quite as good as Healing Word. But it has its niche as well, so, you know, I'll never say no to that. Level 13, you get Blight and Death Ward. Blight on its own is not a bad damage spell for the level. It is only single target. I don't think that it's a great spell, but I do think it benefits a little from things like Alchemical Savant, which help you to get a little more oomph out of it. So it's not a bad spell on the Artificer, and you don't really have a list of like great damaging spells. So, you know, it's not a bad choice. Necrotic damage is usually a fairly reliable damage type. Maybe not against undead, but against most other targets it's usually really good. Death Ward, on the other hand, is a great spell. You know, makes it so that if somebody would have gone unconscious, instead they're only at 1, and that can be pretty handy. So the fact that it lasts 8 hours, does not use concentration, it's a really good buff. 17th level, you get Cloud Kill and Raise Dead. Cloud Kill, the damage on it isn't phenomenal for this level spell, but it is persistent damage, and especially if you have allies who can like push enemies back into the cloud, it can be very handy. Like say a warlock with Repelling Blast, and you know, by 17th level they're hitting a guy 4 times. You can be pushing that guy 30, 40 feet, you know, so when they move out, your warlock friend just pushes them right back in again, and that allows you to really get a lot more mileage out of the spell. But even things like the Crush Your Feet give you a bit of push. There's other abilities too that can give you some pushback, and you know, under those circumstances, if you can like keep the enemy confined inside the cloud, or you do something fun like you cast Cloud Kill and then the wizard casts Wall of Force or Force Cage or something, and now your enemy's trapped in there with a Cloud Kill, you know, that kind of stuff is awesome. As for Raise Dead, again, good spell. Not as good as Revivify, of course, because that's, you know, only a 3rd level spell. And you are getting this at 17th level. That is pretty late in the game to be getting a Resurrection type spell. But, who knows, maybe you haven't needed one because you have a Cleric in your party. But now, here you are at high level, and it's the Cleric who dies. Well, suddenly you're going to be pretty glad that you have Raise Dead. And I really like it being on your Always Prepared list, because it is a very circumstantial spell, which hopefully you just never, ever, ever need. But in that occasion where the Cleric suddenly died and now you need it, you're like, oh, I didn't have it prepared. It's like, but wait, I'm an Artificer, and it's always on my prepared list because I'm an Alchemist. So, you know, suddenly it becomes a lot more valuable. So, again, I really like having that kind of spell on my spell list. So that is the Alchemist spell list. The Armorer, at level 3, we're going to get Magic Missile and Thunder Wave. Thunder Wave has decent damage, has some pushback. Magic Missile, the damage isn't great, but it never misses, and unless they have a shield spell, which, I mean, usually if you're fighting like an enemy wizard or sorcerer, you're probably going to figure this guy might have shield. I won't use Magic Missile. But if you're fighting just some like giant, you know, creature in like full plate mail or something, like some knight or evil paladin or something like that, and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hit this guy, and he's probably got decent saving throws, but Magic Missile is reliable damage. You know, under those circumstances, it can be pretty nice. Level 5, Mirror Image and Shatter. Mirror Image, of course, is just a great defensive spell. Hard to go wrong with Mirror Image. One of the better defensive spells in the game, especially for this level. Shatter, I mean, it is one of the only like kind of damage AoE spells prior to 3rd level spells when you start getting things like Fireball and Lightning Bolts and whatnot. The damage on is pretty low, so I'm not the biggest fan of Shatter, but you know, there are side benefits. It can do a bunch of damage, like structure damage and stuff, which could be useful. Or sometimes you're just fighting a bunch of like really weak minions and you need to clear them out so you can get to like the main boss guy. In which case, you know, just AoEing them down is usually your fastest and best alternative. Short of, you know, Hypnotic Pattern them all or something like that. Which of course you get next level. But either way, Shatter has its moments as well. At level 9, we get Hypnotic Pattern and Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt, I find harder to use usually than Fireball, let's be honest. There's not time, I'm not just saying there's not times when you catch a bunch of people in a hallway and you can just blast a whole line of them, in which case it's great. But usually that's not how things happen. I have seen parties though where they try to lure people into a hallway and then lightning bolt them. That can be successful. And in general, lightning isn't as highly resisted or immune as fire. So I'm not saying that it's a bad spell. It still suffers from the same problem that, you know, most damage spells have, which is that the monster hit points are scaling faster. But it's not like Lightning Bolt's bad by any means. It's a classic for a reason. Hypnotic Pattern, on the other hand, is honestly one of my favorite 3rd level spells. I would usually rather Hypnotic Pattern people than Fireball them in a lot of cases. This starts to change at really high levels when you fight a lot of things that might be immune to those conditions. And you fight things with legendary saving throws, because obviously you're never going to be able to successfully use it on them. Though if they fail their saving throw, which they probably won't, if they're not immune, which they probably were, then they'll just use a legendary save and, you know, whatever. But that's why you have things like Force Cage, you know, for those circumstances. But for lower level spells, I love Hypnotic Pattern. I think it's a great spell. Level 13, Fire Shield and Greater Invisibility. Fire Shield can be really useful in some of these like Thorns type builds where you want to get hit, you know. You cast Fire Shield on yourself, you wade into combat, you start smacking guys around, and every time they hit you, they're taking damage. Or maybe you know that there's certain elemental types and you can customize your Fire Shield to either do the hot or the cold and give you, you know, bonuses against the opposite. And, you know, that's okay too. I still find it to be a rather circumstantial spell though. But the fact that, again, it persists and it can do damage every time you get hit, there are times when I like those kind of spells. Greater Invisibility, of course, is just awesome. It's awesome for obvious reasons, like the fact that you can now get advantage on your attacks and people have disadvantage to hit you. But it's also awesome for the same reason that Cole the Bard in the Whitespire campaign absolutely abused the heck out of this spell, where he'd go invisible and then he'd follow around the enemy casters while invisible, counterspelling them, and they couldn't counterspell him because they can't see him, and you know, it was insane. It was a very, very handy spell in those circumstances. So having casting abilities, you know, in general, if you're like, hey, I want to cast a bunch of spells, but I don't want to get counterspelled, Greater Invisibility takes care of that. It also helps you to land those hits in combat. So, great spell in general. 17th level, Pass Wall and Wall of Force. I like Pass Wall on full casters when I'm getting it at like 9th level, because it can be a very, very handy scouting technique. It can be very nice for bypassing parts of a dungeon that you just don't want to have to go through, right? It's very handy for those. But by the time you're 17th level, you know, other people in the party have things like Plane Shift, you know, like as far as like an exploration technique, it's just not as good because you've got so many high level options available by then. Wall of Force, on the other hand, is still great, even at 17th level. You know, it's just an amazing, amazing spell for cutting off sections of the battlefield, locking down certain groups of enemies. You know, the whole divide and conquer method. We're fighting like 8, 10 things, but they're all fairly powerful. Well, let's just trap 5 of them in in the Wall of Force, and now we'll kill the other 5. And then when they're dead, we can maybe even heal up a bit and get ready for the next part, drop the Wall of Force and fight the other half, you know? So much easier than having to deal with all 10 at once, right? So overall, I think that both of those two have some pretty solid spell lists. Some real standouts. No really like terrible disastrous spells for the most part. You know, fairly good list in general. The Artillerist. The Artillerist is definitely the one that seems to be the most about the direct damage. There's some really nice spells on here as well, though. Level 3, we get Shield and Thunderwave. Shield's pretty handy, obviously. Helps to negate a bunch of incoming damage, usually. Thunderwave, like I said before, decent damage, some pushback. That could be circumstantially really nice. Not a bad spell. And, you know, one of the very few spells that can actually do a bit of AoE damage at those levels. Level 5, Scorching Ray and Shatter. We've already talked about Shatter, so I won't bother mentioning it again, really. Scorching Ray, as far as single target damage at this level, it's a pretty good spell. You know, 5th level, I think it's still fairly relevant that if you want to hit one powerful target, it's not bad. The fact that it's a hit roll, the fact that you get 3 separate attacks, means that you're almost guaranteed to get some damage in, right? So, as far as that goes, it's not too bad. Level 9, Fireball and Wind Wall. Fireball, like I've said, is a great spell at 5th level. You can like one-shot entire encounters with it a lot of times. By 9th level, it's really starting to lose a lot of its oomph. But, you know, it can still be good circumstantially. Like I said, maybe you have a bunch of trash minions you need to clear. It can be good for those circumstances. You're fighting some evil necromancer lord or whatever, right? And he's the big threat, but he's got a bunch of skeletons and zombies that he's summoned up as well, or whatever. Or maybe some ghouls or ghasts or something along those lines. Being able to like AoE a bunch of those things down quickly and let your fighter and your barbarian and your paladin or whatever else you have get on top of the necromancer and just start bashing his face in as soon as possible, that's pretty good. That's a lot harder to do when they've got a screen of enemies in front of them and now they have to, you know, wade through those and maybe get grappled or eat a bunch of opportunity attacks. So I'm not saying that it's worthless by level 9, but obviously it's just not as good as it would have been on, you know, if you were a wizard getting a level 5. But I'll never say no to Fireball. It still has its moments. Wind Wall, pretty decent defensive spell. I find that it's a lot more circumstantial, but there are chances to use it where it can be pretty good. I remember one of the party members cast it in this one fight. They were fighting a bunch of Drow elves, and there were some like high level Drow, but then there were also like these like 16 guards. They were like level 2, but they all had, you know, like hand crossbows and stuff like that, and they're just shooting at the party, and you know, 16 attacks, even if they're only hitting you on like a, you know, 16, 17 plus usually, they're still hitting you, you know, just due to the number of attacks. And I think some of the weapons are poisoned, and then, you know, they're also forcing concentration saves. That kind of stuff can be really, really annoying. And one of the party members cast Wind Wall and really shut down a lot of that stuff. And rather than just, you know, fireballing down all the trash, they just used Wind Wall and ignored most of it. And that worked quite well. So there are chances for those kind of spells to really shine. Ice Storm, obviously you get some damage. You also can create like difficult terrain and stuff. So it's not, I like it more for the battlefield control elements almost than for the damage. I consider the damage as kind of a bonus. It's a pretty decent spell. Wall of Fire just kind of falls into that same category I mentioned before, where if all you wanted to do was some damage, Wall of Fire isn't really the best. But if you have a way of doing that damage round after round, Wall of Fire starts to really, really shine. It can also cause obscurement, which means that, you know, enemies have a hard time targeting your own spellcasters through the wall. They can't really see them to shoot at them. You have disadvantage. Enemy spellcasters can't really target them. And if you're able to cut the enemy in half with the Wall of Fire, and now maybe their like spellcasters are towards the back, right, and they've got all their tough minion guys in front to protect them, but now all of a sudden their spellcasters can't see you, but your spellcasters can see all their minion guys, right? And you can create some really nice circumstances with that. And then similar to what I said before with things like Cloudkill, maybe you do have that Warlock with Repelling Blast, you know, and somebody comes through the Wall of Fire, he pushes them back again. Now they have to come through it again, and they have to take the damage again. And Wall of Fire really starts to shine when you're able to use it under those kind of circumstances. So I like Wall of Fire a lot, especially if you're rather creative and have some interesting tactics and, you know, use some teamwork. 17th level, Cone of Cold and Wall of Force. We already talked about Wall of Force. I think Wall of Force is an amazing spell. No need to get into that again. Cone of Cold. The damage is pretty good. Again, you're getting it at 17th level. That's pretty late. The damage isn't as good by then. But there are chances where you might want to hit, multiple targets at once. And cold damage is less resistant than fire. So, it's not a bad spell. It's just on a half caster at 17th level, it does lack a lot of the oomph that it would have had on like a wizard or a sorcerer or somebody like that when they were getting it, at level 9, right? So that's the Artillerist spell list. It's definitely the one that's most focused on spell damage. And for some people, like I know my friend Jaden played an Artillerist and he thought that they had the best spell list of all the Artificers. I tend to think the exact opposite, but that's not necessarily that he's wrong and I'm right or whatever, right? It's just some people like damage spells a lot, right? I kind of like them and tend to like other spells better. It's really just a matter of personal preference. I will say though, in the defense of damage spells, a lot of the really good, like hold person, hold monster type spells that we think of as being, like pretty good, like shut down type spells, even Hypnotic Pattern and stuff. Like I mentioned, as you get to higher levels, a lot more things have legendary resist, and suddenly that hold monster spell that looked so good to you when you were first picking your level 5 spells, it's good against some things, but all of a sudden you go to fight the big bad evil guy and find out that, oh wait, he's a dragon and he has, legendary resist. Suddenly it's not as useful. Whereas damage spells, even if they have legendary resist, even if it requires a hit roll or they get a saving throw for half or whatever, damage is still damage. And since everybody else in your party is just trying to kill this freaking dragon as fast as they can, more damage is always appreciated, right? And it's definitely a lot better than, say, using a bunch of spells trying to get rid of all his legendary resists, and by the time he's used all 3 of his legendary resists, the fighters and barbarians and your arcane archer all, have the guy dead already, right? So it's not that damage spells are necessarily useless either. I kind of have a low opinion on them because I find that there's often better options, but they're never, like more damage is always better than less damage, right? So I don't want to sound like I'm hating on damage spells entirely. There are definitely times when you're like, you know what, we just need to get as much damage into this guy as we can, and maybe that means we use a Blight, or maybe that means you cast some other spell that does direct damage, whatever, right? But it's better than him using a legendary save, and now your spell did absolutely nothing at all, right? And finally, that takes us to the Battlesmith, the only subclass that does not start with an A. Level 3, we have Heroism and Shield. I already mentioned Shield, but Heroism is also great. I really like both these spells. It's hard to go wrong with either one of them. So, there you go. Level 5, Branding Smite and Warding Bond. Warding Bond can be kind of useful if you're kind of playing that like off-tank, melee or melee skirmish type of role, right? Where maybe you're in there, you're hitting guys, you're doing some damage, but you've got like say a barbarian or a fighter or somebody, and that's like the guy who's really trying to be the focus of enemy attacks, right? Then it can be pretty decent because, kind of lets you like share some of the damage with them and just helps that guy to perform his role even better. And, it's not too bad for that circumstance. Branding Smite, on the other hand, I really just don't like it much at all, to be honest. I think it's one of the weaker Smite options, to be honest. And, the damage type is okay. It's just, I don't know. It requires my concentration, takes my bonus action to cast it, then I have to be able to hit them with it. And if I miss, then, I could lose concentration if I get hit. It has a lot more downsides, as opposed to, say, like, a spell where I don't have to worry about it, it doesn't require a hit roll, they just have a saving throw. Or maybe it has a hit roll, but no saving throw. And then when it hits, I can, like, kind of guarantee that something's going to happen. Whereas this, I'm casting it, now I have to make a melee hit roll, I might miss, I'm still concentrating on it, there's no guarantee it's going to get the damage in. I'm just not really a big fan of that particular spell. Level 9, though, you get Aura of Vitality and Conjure Barrage. And Aura of Vitality, I've mentioned this spell a bunch before. I think it's just a great healing spell. It's good in combat, it's good out of combat. It's even better out of combat because you don't have to worry about losing concentration. And it does a ton of healing for a 3rd level spell. So, especially after they nerfed things like what was the druid one? Healing Spirits, where you could just, form the conga line and run through the healing spirits over and over again, and then they, kind of errated that to make that no longer a thing, which was probably good, because honestly that was ridiculous, but it was so effective. So I actually think that Aura of Vitality is an amazing, amazing healing spell. So very glad to have that on my spell list. Conjure Barrage. It's not bad, actually. I mean, it is a pretty decent amount of damage. You can choose the damage type, which gives it some nice flexibility. So I actually kind of like this spell. It gives you some decent range damage options, which is something the Battlesmith doesn't have a lot of. So, overall, I actually kind of like this for a direct damage spell. I think it's one of the better ones that you could have. Level 13, Aura of Purity and Fire Shield. We already mentioned Fire Shield. Aura of Purity. I like the spell, but it is a lot more circumstantial. It's one that I like having it on my prepared list, though, because again, if I know that I'm going to be having to deal with certain, especially like undead or other things that are causing certain types of damage and certain status effects, then this really shuts that kind of stuff down. So having it just be always prepared is really, really nice. It doesn't have you can always count on using something like an Aura of Vitality, right? Because people are always going to get hurt, and you're always going to want to be able to do healing. So, that's just a great spell. This one's more circumstantial, but it is really, really good at fighting those types of circumstantial enemies. So having it being always prepared is actually really nice, in my opinion. I like this spell a lot under these circumstances. If it was one that was just on my spell list, and I had to have it prepared, and I don't necessarily know if I'm going to need it, then I think it has a lot less value for me. But because it's always prepared, I like it a lot more. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, level 17, we get Banishing Smite and Mass Cure Wounds. So as much as I might hate on Branding Smite, Banishing Smite is the exact opposite story. It adds quite a bit of damage to that attack, so that in and of itself is pretty good. And B, if you know that the enemy is fairly damaged, you could just banish them, and there's no saving throw against it. It is dependent on the amount of hit points they have left. But, in a lot of campaigns, I'll even tell players if they ask, if they're like, oh, does he look like he's hurt yet? Like, how badly injured is he? No, I'll give them approximate ideas. I'll be like, I used the Bloodied, which I think came from 3rd or 4th edition or whatever. I think it was 4th edition, where Bloodied just meant they were under half, And I'll say, yeah, he's bloodied or whatever, right? Or if he's below 25%, I'll say that, he's appearing to be severely injured at this point. And then that'll give the players kind of a hint. Now granted, maybe they're fighting somebody who has 800 hit points, and severely injured means he still has 190 hit points left, In which case that Banishing Smite might have gone in vain. But just saying, in general, I kind of like to give the players hints. I mean, honestly, if you're looking at a guy who just got stabbed with a sword, you can probably get a good visual on how badly does he appear to be injured, So I don't think it's that unrealistic to give the players a bit of a hint there. And, I think Banishing Smite is quite good. Mass Cure Wounds, again, nice heal for, especially as a backup healer. You are 17th level at this point, so hopefully your party is not relying on you to, keep them alive solely in combat. But, maybe you've got a bunch of people who all got really badly injured by, a big AoE attack. I mean, you're 17th level. Maybe you're fighting, an ancient dragon or something. And the cleric's like, oh, I got to heal the warrior before the fighter before he goes down. But that means he doesn't maybe have the ability of healing everybody else, perhaps. So you're like, okay, well, you heal him, and then I can throw out my mass cure wounds, and kind of top everybody up a bit, right? And, just having more healing is always better than less healing, so I think it's pretty good as well. Anyways, that brings us to the end of the Artificer subclass spell list. Hopefully I was able to give people some sort of clarity on what I think is good or not good. And like I said, these are all just my own opinions, right? Some people might be like, you know, I really love Lightning Bolt, and you seem to be kind of, you know, not as big of a fan on it. That's fine. People's experience may vary, right? And like I said, I think that Lightning Bolt's actually pretty decent for direct damage spells. A lot of my opinions on these spells, too, depend on who's playing them, right? Like, I like Fireball a lot more on a wizard, like I said, or a Lightning Bolt a lot more on a wizard or a sorcerer, for example, than I do on, you know, like an Eldritch Knight, right? And yes, it's still better on a half caster like, you know, like the Artificer than it would be on a, you know, third caster or whatever you want to call the Eldritch Knight, quarter caster almost, because they're still limited in their spell choices. You know, it's still better, but if you put it on a scale with Wizard getting that spell right at level 5, and then you're over here at like level 9, and then they're over here at level 13, you know, you can just tell that the further it takes you to get those spells, the less value they're going to have. Whereas something like a Hypnotic Pattern is still really good. You can still shut down a lot of enemies with that spell, whether you're getting it for the first time at level 5 or at level 9. And, you know, I already mentioned Hypnotic Pattern's not the end-all be-all all the time either, right? It really excels against targets that don't have those kind of immunities. But those immunities become a lot more common when you start fighting more and more powerful foes. So, you know, those spells taper off too. And then, like I said, sometimes damage spells kind of start coming back into their own, right? Although, to be fair, your wizard might have Meteor Swarm by then, and that spell is always going to be great, no matter what. So, anyways, those are my thoughts. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. And especially for the next video I do, where we're going to have like the charisma multi-class characters, I want to see like different people's comments in the comment section. Like, how are you going to build those type of characters? Don't necessarily leave those comments in this video, but you've got, you know, some time now to think about like, hey, how would I do that? And then when we do the charisma class video, people can be like, this is what I came up with, and this is how I combined them. This, you know, this is, I went like 2 levels of Paladin only just to get my Divine Smites and to get the Paladin out of the way. And then took a bunch of Hexblade, and I got extra attack from Warlock instead, you know, and I could use Charisma. And then I took a couple Bard levels or whatever, or maybe I just went a lot of Bard and I got my extra attack, if I even wanted extra attack, from College of Swords or from College of Valor or something like that. And I just took 2 levels for Smite, you know, or whatever, right? I think there's so many different ways you could do this. I mean, honestly, you could say I took 1 level of Paladin just for heavy armor and a shield, and then I took a bunch of Sorcerer and Warlock and Bard levels, and I just played a ranged caster in full plate mail. I mean, that's perfectly viable as well, right? I like the fact that there's a lot of things you can do with these types of combinations. I just think they could have some really crazy, fun, weird builds, you know? And I look forward to seeing what people have come up with and what subclasses they wanted to use and stuff. So I think that'll be kind of a fun exercise. And anyway, I'm looking forward to it. So I'll see you next time. Bye.